records. Most of us, I think most of you know what I'm talking about, who grew up playing in the 70s and 80s, or grew up in the 70s and 80s. Most of the Les Pauls we got our mitts on were heavy. They had the tone was kind of mid-rangey and high output, which sounded great when you put them into a Marshall or an amp where you wanted to get distortion, but they were kind of a one-trick pony. You wanted that big, beefy sound for playing some rock and stuff. They sounded great. But at the same time, you're thinking, well, how come when I listen to the Allman Brothers live at Fillmore, they're both playing Les Pauls, but all of a sudden their tones are glassy and killer, and they sound glorious. And then when they turn it up, it's all fat and juicy. And it's because those original, or listening to Mike Bloomfield in the Super Session record, or when he's playing on that Live Adventures of Mike Bloomfield and Al Cooper, and he's playing through a twin or a super reverb or whatever it was, and he's got it cranked and he turns it down, and it gets all clean, and then he turns it up, and it's got bite, and it sounds glorious. Or if you listen to Led Zeppelin, you listen to some of that live Led Zeppelin stuff, he's turning down those guitars, and it is glassy, it sounds glorious, and he turns it up, and it's just biting, it sounds glorious. The classic, quintessential Les Paul through Marshall, the first one actually, a tone, was of course Clapton's sound with the John Mayall's Blues Breakers, that Beano record. And that's a very bright sounding guitar. And then when Peter Green started playing with John Mayall in the early Fleetwood Mac, that sound of that Les Paul, very, very bright and biting. Who else we got? We got Jeff Beck on the Truth record and so on and so forth. All of those early Les Paul sounds, you listen back, and a lot of those guys, most of those guys were Tele guys that switched to a Les Paul, because the early Les Pauls from the 50s sound like meaty Telecasters. If you ever play one and plug it in, they're bright as hell. They got meat to them, but they're bright sounding guitars. They're totally different from the guitars that most of us were exposed to as we were growing up. And one of the reasons is that the pickups, there's all kinds of mythology about that, but they were not a very high output pickup. They were kind of underwound. Some people think they were scatterwound, whatever. But the bottom line is that they weren't very high output, and they were very bright sounding. They sounded like fat sounding single coils. And the Gibson Custom Shop has gotten hip to that lately. A lot of those true historic guitars are glorious. There's a lot of those guitars where they have that sound again. But again, getting a consistent sound with those, trying to find pickups that are consistent that get that sound is difficult. So when we started working with the classic humbuckers, we had this long discussion on those early pickups and what they sounded like. So we had access to an original Seth Lover PAF humbucker, and we went after getting that sound. But with, like all the Fluence pickups, there are multiple voices for each pickup. So with the neck pickup on these, we went with a sound that was, on the neck pickup, we wanted it to be like a original PAF. But one of the things I want you to notice is that I did not touch any EQ on the amp. And if you're all familiar with, if you play a Fender style guitar and then plug a Gibson into it, usually it sounds like a mud fest, and you've got like to completely re-EQ everything, or else it's your ears just can't get used to it. For whatever reason, the way these pickups are made, I can plug in a Les Paul right after the Strat, plug the Tele in after that, and they all sound good. They sound like the way they're supposed to, but that's very unusual, because usually right now the amp should sound like there's a big towel over it. But when I turn the volume down on this guitar, again, it has that thing where I don't lose any highs, and it just sounds less loud. straight into the deluxe right after playing the Strat, and it sounds glorious. So, really, for me, it was impossible for me to switch rigs or in the middle of a set. You know, unless you have a totally different rig setup. To me, it's very difficult to go back and forth between a Fender style guitar and a Les Paul or a 335, just because they don't sound right in comparison. Your ears can't adjust. These pickups, they sound glorious. So what I would say to someone is if they've always wanted to use a Les Paul or a 335 or some kind of humbucker guitar in their set, you know, they're doing, classic rock band's gonna do, Hendrix and Dire Straits or Derek and the Dominoes, but at some point they're gonna do Cream, they're gonna do Led Zeppelin, they're gonna do Rush, whatever, and those are humbucker tones. So you can grab a guitar with these pickups on through the same rig, plug it in, it's gonna sound magnificent, right? So as you saw, I did grab the tone control halfway through there, and it beefens up substantially. So the second sound is like a little push over the edge. It just gets a little fatter sounding and a little bit more robust. Another great thing about these pickups, in the middle position, it's got that kind of spanky tone